Welcome back to another episode of the Shoemaker Films podcast. I'm joined here with Jeff Stein of ELPS, Private Detective Agency. Jeff, how are you today?
I am good, thank you. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, transparency, we're fraternity brothers in the same fraternity, but this is actually the first time we've ever met. So, pretty neat network of people around the Philadelphia area at Westchester, KDR. But what you do is pretty fascinating. So I wanted to sit down and hear your story, your entrepreneurial journey, and get to know you a little bit more and your business. So,
I look forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. So tell us what ELPS does.
ELPS, Private Detective Agency. We are a full-fledged private investigative and security firm.
Okay.
We provide all different types of investigations and security services throughout really the tri-state area. We focus on Pennsylvania, but we're licensed in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware.
Okay. And what are the services that you guys offer?
We do a lot of different services.
Yeah.
Personally, I specialize in criminal defense investigations and risk assessments, expert witness work. We have a full staff. We do different surveillances for workers' comp, disability case, personal injury cases, residency investigations, the gamut. We do background checks. We provide investigative services for both criminal and civil cases, civil litigation. We will interview. There could be a lawsuit. We're working on a case now where there's been some sexual assaults of minors. So we're working on the civil side of that. There's already been a conviction, but now they're working on the civil side. So any type of investigation or security, different types of services we provide.
Okay. Are you mostly, I guess, do you both work with private, corporations, residences, but you also work with like public sector, like law enforcement or?
We don't necessarily partner with law enforcement. We may, but it's not like we're an outsource of the law enforcement. There could be a missing persons case or something of that nature where we're providing the investigative work for. There was a recent shooting of a school bus in Coatesville. One of the defendants is one of our clients, trying to prove that what his involvement was or wasn't in that case. So in that sense, we're sort of working a little bit with trying to provide the facts from what we can identify.
Yeah.
But we're not working with them. In that case, probably working against them.
Yeah.
But we do, I do federally appointed work, so through the courts. So I have cases that I work on that are through the CJA, Department of Justice, and that's funded by the government.
Okay.
And those are usually high-profile federal cases, definitely death penalty cases where the defendant is provided legal service on behalf of the state for their defense.
Yep. Okay. Wow. And you founded this firm for how long ago?
2006.
Okay.
Is when this became a thought, and then it grew from there.
Yeah. And what's your background?
So my background is in a little bit in law enforcement, corporate security, loss prevention.
Yeah.
I've worked my way up. I went to the police academy, I went to Seegert, and then I went into the private sector.
Okay.
I became a director of loss prevention security for different retailers.
Yeah.
And being a victim of mergers and acquisitions, I decided to go out on my own, control my own destiny. And I did. I have always worked on the side, even when I was doing full-time career, since I was 19 years old, working for a private investigator.
Yeah.
Part-time, per diem.
Do you have, you talked a little bit about the types of clients that you serve. Do you have, is there the bulk of your business serving one type of sector or client, offering one service, or is it really just pretty broad spectrum of what you do day to day?
It varies. we're providing right now, we're doing around the clocks kind of a counter surveillance slash security executive protection for, there was an employee termination, somebody that they were concerned about the risk or threat of that person that they're terminating. So we're providing security around the clock for that company, making sure the terminated employee doesn't return.
Okay. Wow.
So that's an individual company. We do work for, like I said, the Department of Justice, the CJA cases, attorneys, law firms are a big client of ours, and then private citizens, inmates. Inmates are a big source as well.
Really?
And then retail chains on the security side of things.
Yep. And do you have W-2 employees, or are these, what does that look like, the organization?
Yes, all employees. We have, currently we're up to 50, 55 employees.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And every now and then we may sub something out for a 1099 to another private investigator.
Okay.
If we're just overstaffed or not overstaffed. Our caseload gets pretty demanding. I know we have another case right now that we're working on that we subbed some of the work out to somebody we use on a regular basis. But for the most part, they're all actual employees.
And are these mostly detectives, investigators, security guards? Like, what are the what's the makeup of your business, I guess?
Good portion is security, and then I have a small crew for the investigations and surveillances, office manager, security supervisor. Mm-hmm. So it's diversified.
So just what are kind of the top trends right now in the security world? What are clients asking you? What are they coming to ask you about? What are you talking about with clients?
Well, there's two different sides of that, because there's the investigative side and then there's the security side. So if we break that down from the investigative side, it's a gamut. We do, as I mentioned, criminal defense investigations, cheating spouses, cohabitation cases. Cohabitation cases seem to be on the rise based on a couple getting divorced and how their divorce decree reads and, who's living with who. So the cohabitation, child custody cases. We do a lot of residency investigations for school districts. Okay. So for example, a student says they're living in this neighborhood, but they're living somewhere in a different school district and being dropped off. So we provide that to school districts. On the security side, there's corporations, buildings. We do high-end offices, and then we do residential. We do apartment buildings, a bowling alley, some Wawas, Lowe's, Trader Joe's.
Okay. So anybody that needs security, any high risk retail environments, you have a security guard there.
Correct. Special events. We do the Devon Horse Show on a regular basis. So there's some other special events too. High holidays, different houses of worship during different holidays. The election, we got asked to do security for news media. As they're staging on the streets, obviously protect them, protect their equipment and so forth.
Right.
So very diversified and depending on what's going on in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. No shortage of crazy people out there also.
For sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like it keeps you busy. There's a variety of different things. There's no typical day, or is it, is there a day to day? I mean, what does your typical day look like, if there is one?
Yeah, there is no typical day, which is what I enjoy about this. Yeah. Although, as in the position of the company, I got to deal with a lot of administrative issues, selling the services, dealing with licensing, making sure the licenses are up to date, insurance is up to date. Okay. So there's a lot of corporate administrative tasks that are needed, payroll, dealing with different issues as they arise. Client has a new need, a new concern, need to deal with that. Phone's always ringing, which is a good thing. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm out in the field doing investigations, talking to witnesses, trying to find witnesses,
Yeah.
and just prove the facts,
Right.
whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent. We're just going to report what we find.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine, 50 employees. I mean, you're busy doing the CEO tasks, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a partner in the business, or is it just?
No.
Yeah.
But I'd be lost without my operations manager or my office manager, Mike. He does a lot. He's interviewing. We're interviewing on a regular basis, always trying to backfill and fill in what we need in future
Right.
openings. So
Yeah.
I'd be lost without him.
Yeah. That's good. Who was your first hire, if you don't mind me asking? Go back. What was the role that you hired for first, I guess?
Armed security during Black Friday, during the holidays.
Yeah.
That was probably the first employees that I officially hired. As well as interns. I take on an intern. I started probably 15 years ago taking interns from Westchester University.
Oh, wow.
Somebody I knew, their brother was graduating but needed an internship. And excuse me, Westchester University's criminal justice program, they require to graduate all of their students to do a practicum, which is 12 credits.
Okay.
And it's usually their summer before their senior year. So junior into senior, if they meet some of the requirements and take some classes early, they can do it sophomore into junior year. But in any case, they're required to work 37 and a half hours for 12 weeks.
Okay.
So I started doing that program, taking on intern, about 15 years ago. And I do that as a hybrid. They're partially paid and partially not, depending
Okay.
if we're doing billable time, billable hours, and so forth. And that was probably one of my other first hires, was that intern. And
Yeah.
that program has since evolved with interns. And this past summer, we had 7 interns from 4 different schools.
Okay.
So it was an interesting time, but it worked out really well.
For all at one time?
All at one time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how does that are you doing a lot of training, or is it mostly on the job shadowing, or what does that look like, the actual program?
Combination of everything. So
Yeah.
there is training, educating them about security,
Yeah.
about investigations, having them work on live cases, real cases, reviewing case files, and then security, put them in security roles,
Yeah.
train them to do security and surveillances. And
Yeah.
they're out there doing work, doing
Wow.
surveillances, up to whatever we feel their capabilities are. So it's a good opportunity for them to see a lot of what's going on in the criminal justice field before they decide where they want to go.
Yeah. Do a lot of them, do they become cops? Do they go into the private sector? Like, is it kind of a mix, or have you ever hired any right out of college?
Yeah,
Full time?
I do. In fact, Mike, my office manager, he originally was scheduled slotted to do an internship with me
Okay.
the first year of COVID, and then that COVID happened, and they weren't allowing their students to do in-person
Okay.
internships. So I ended up hiring him part-time, and he worked his way into full-time.
Oh, that's great.
So I do. And where they end up, a lot of them in various fields. The very first one that I mentioned, he ended up becoming a financial planner. So
Okay.
he didn't stay with criminal justice.
Different type of securities, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But most of them do go into law enforcement. I know of people in municipal law enforcement, state troopers, several that go into the military. One who just graduated from the Coast Guard, or just finishing his 4 years in the Coast Guard, right out of being an intern. He went into the Coast Guard, and now he's going to be leaving the Coast Guard after 4 years in December and going right into the police academy for Atlantic City,
Okay.
New Jersey. So we've had people go into the Attorney General's office, bank fraud and security, various.
Okay.
Others law school, others just didn't stay in the profession for one reason or another.
Yep. Are there certifications that, people need to get, or that you need to get, or self-defense training or anything like that? Like,
there is, and it
it
depends on
the
what you
role.
do.
Yeah.
It depends on your role. Pennsylvania is not where I would like it to be right now. Pennsylvania is governed by the Private Detective Act of 1953, which is antiquated. It needs to be, when I say we, I'm past president of the Pennsylvania Association of Licensed Investigators. And in the past, we have rewritten the law. It made its way to the House, didn't go to the other side. So it really needs to be improved in Pennsylvania. It doesn't require any training for security. Now in New Jersey, for example, in Delaware, where we're licensed as well, you need to have security guard training.
Okay.
New Jersey, I happen to be an instructor. It's called a SOAR instructor. And it's the initial class is 40 hours of security training.
Okay.
Actually, excuse me, it's 24. It's 24 hours, the initial
Okay.
class. But everybody's required to take that, and every 2 years they need to do an 8-hour recertification. So I try to do that with my employees the best I can.
Yeah.
But Pennsylvania doesn't require that.
Okay.
For me, there's a lot of different certifications that I get to advance my CV and my capabilities, and with risk assessments, threat assessments. There's a board certified criminal defense investigator, board accredited investigator. So there's a lot of certification programs out there, and I'm a proponent of continuing to learn and get educated.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's good for your clients too. I mean, you're just continuously improving,
Right.
Staying on top of new methodologies or trends and staying sharp. So
Very true.
Yep. So, so you mentioned a little bit about, inbound requests, selling. I mean, do you do much marketing or, outreach to businesses? What does that part of the business look like as a marketing person? Like, I'm always curious what businesses are doing to kind of get their name out there.
I currently spend a decent amount of money on marketing in different platforms. There's some local magazines that we advertise and market in.
Yeah.
We've do social media, a lot of online presence. There's some public or professional trade magazines that PI Magazine that we've advertised in, that we've been authors in, written material for, belonging to a lot of different associations and networking with them.
Yeah.
Marketing my firm to those different associations, from just being a member or attending conferences, or writing for a newsletter or asking questions or putting something out there on their listservs or LinkedIn. I'll do a lot of PSAs, public service announcements, or white papers, and post them on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. With all that being said, though, in my profession, I do find that word of mouth is probably the best. Mm-hmm. We do some mailings as well. We do some postcards, and very little return on investment. But as you know, you need to touch people in different ways.
Yeah.
And we have gotten work from the postcard mailings. So if you get a little bit, it can't hurt.
Sure.
But just word of mouth. Inmates, for example, talk to each other, right? They're cellmates. They're in prison 24/7 together. They share our information. Attorneys share our information.
Yeah.
You do a good job for one attorney, and somebody else calls and they have a need. That is just probably one of the best things we can do. We do advertise through some other online yellow pages, if you will, for private investigators.
Okay.
So there are some specific ones out there. PI Now, for example, is one of those. So we try to market in some of those. So your website, you want your web to be seen.
Yeah.
Google rankings.
Yeah,
I guess your rankings.
A lot of backlinks, good presence on the website. Yeah.
So PI Now is, if you Googled like private investigator in Westchester, my company's going to come up. but it may also come up through PI Now because of all of their analytics and spiders they're putting out there to improve their Google rankings.
Okay. So you're not on like Craigslist, right?
You know what? In the past, I'll be honest with you, and if we have some further conversation a little bit later, I did advertise on Craigslist.
Yeah.
My services, and I did pick up a few jobs, but I haven't advertised on Craigslist in 10 years at least. But when I first started, it was free advertising.
Sure.
And
I thought there was a TV show on HBO years ago. I think the actor was Jason Schwartzman, who's basically like a struggling writer, and he decided one day he wanted to be a private investigator, and he posted on Craigslist. And the whole TV show was like one season. It was just him going on these crazy adventures in New York City, like investigating things. So
interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to remember the name of it.
There was Comcast used to do a show in different locations called Private Eyes.
Okay.
And it was real private investigators. And I was featured. They featured several of my cases on there at one point before they just discontinued. It was one of those, something that Comcast, like on demand.
Okay.
So it wasn't a regular series, but you can go to, at that time, you can go to Comcast and do on-demand Private Eyes and see Private Eye in Chicago or Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
Westchester, Pennsylvania. And they featured me on their cases and on some of my cases. And it was pretty neat because they're reenacting my cases and filming me.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
In Philadelphia, for example,
Yeah.
Looking for somebody in some back alleys. And it was my first time on TV. And since then, 2 of my other cases have been featured as well.
Oh, really?
I had one case featured on the ID channel.
Okay.
And another one on CNN Death Row Stories. So
oh, wow.
I've gotten some good TV time.
That's cool.
And let me tell you, that's great advertising.
Sure.
Everybody's saying that.
Do you do any like PR stuff, like getting on the news, talking about, security trends or?
Not as much as I would like.
Yeah.
So that's something I would like to do more. And that's something that I will put out on, like I said, social media as a public service announcement. I've been featured on Fox News Online, one of my articles in the past.
Okay.
But I would definitely like to do a little more.
Okay.
Have that opportunity.
Sure. Yeah.
So for anyone who's listening, you need a subject matter expert in a lot of different security and investigative roles. I'd love to chat. I know I recently wrote an article, as I was telling you about how antiquated Pennsylvania is with their Private Detective Act.
Right.
And part of that is we are the only profession. I don't want to sidetrack this too much, but private investigators are the only profession that requires a license in the state of Pennsylvania that isn't licensed out of Harrisburg. So we have to petition the court, the county, on where you're going to office or where you live to get your PI license. And the problem with that is there's 67 different counties in Pennsylvania, which is open to interpretation of the law, 67 different ways. And there's clerks, the clerk of courts, who sort of oversees that and funnels it up to the district attorney.
Okay.
But they're an elected position that could change every 4 years. So they don't necessarily even always understand the program. And anyway, long story short, I wrote an article about that, and I was trying to get it submitted to some of the newspapers, and PI Magazine picked it up. So it's going to be featured in PI Magazine first.
Oh, great.
I just hope Harrisburg reads it because some things need to change.
Yeah.
And that affects unlicensed security companies, especially in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
There's a big problem with that. They're not licensed, means they're not insured. And some of these companies may not realize that.
Okay.
Anyway.
So there's risks with that. There's, liability potentially with companies that hire these unlicensed companies, right? Yeah.
Very true. And another problem in Pennsylvania is constables. Constables get hired frequently by other, let's say a retailer hires a constable. That's not their job. They're not licensed to do that. The constable is an elected position to do work for the courts. And for example, on election, they can provide security for the voting polls, right?
Okay.
That's one of their roles, but they're not licensed to provide armed security at a retail location, but they do.
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting for something to happen, and they're going to get sued. The retailer is going to get sued or named in that liability lawsuit.
Yeah.
And they're going to have no insurance to defend them on this constable because the constable's not licensed. They're insured to provide that service. So
Yeah.
it's a big problem in Pennsylvania, and hopefully that'll get fixed one day.
Yeah.
Before I retire.
That's yeah. That's a really important reason why, a company, a big retailer, or anybody should be working with a, established firm like you guys. So
Yeah.
Are there a lot of I'll call them, I guess, competing, agencies? Are there a lot in the area, that you compete with, or how do you differentiate yourselves from maybe other PI services?
There are quite a few in Pennsylvania. There's a lot in Chester County. I don't really view private investigation companies, firms as competition. Mm-hmm. There's so much work out there.
Yeah.
Especially when you do some niche work in criminal defense, for example, or somebody may do accident reconstruction, or somebody just may like to do surveillance, and that's all they like to do.
Right.
And we get a lot of work from other private investigation companies.
Okay.
And same thing, we we may get a request for something in New York where we're not licensed, and I'm going to reach out to a colleague in New York to handle that job. So I don't feel the competition from the PI sector.
Yeah.
Most of them in this area I know, I'm friends with. We refer work to each other. We'll, bounce ideas off of each other. And there's for any good private investigation firm, there's a lot of work out there.
Yeah.
Just like there are, how many criminal defense attorneys are there, or family law attorneys in Chester County alone? And I'm sure most of them are busy.
Yeah, right.
So as long as you're doing a good job. On the security side, we have a lot of competition, and in the inner cities, there's a lot of, like I mentioned, unlicensed companies that pop up. And then there's some of the big companies, Allied, Universal, and some of the other big players that they just come in lowball, and it's hard to compete with their prices.
Right. Right.
But our services and personnel are going to be at a higher level.
Yeah.
We're paying our employees more, and those are things that you need to factor in, when you're talking to different clients.
Yeah. And the training that you do, you basically take it the next level up to what Pennsylvania requires. Yeah.
Right.
So that's great. Any stories you want to share? Just kind of, I know it's a sensitive what you guys do and confidentiality and things like that. But I think about, like, my wife and I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. And so I think people are just fascinated with this world, but I know there's not a lot for you probably can share, but.
Yes. So there's a lot of cases, a lot of things that are interesting.
Yeah.
I do need to be careful. I can't reveal, need to keep it confidential as far as who the clients are, what some of the cases may have been about. Some people, there was a high profile case in Philadelphia that involved a famous singer's tour manager who was killed, and we worked on that case. And I wish I can share all the details on that.
Yeah.
There are a few that I can touch on. Kobani Savage, that was one of the largest cases in the United States, Southeastern District of Pennsylvania, it was a federal case. There was RICO charges against Kobani and 3 other co-defendants. So there was a total of 4 co-defendants. And they were charged with firebombing a house, killing witnesses. 6 people perished in that house fire. And it was a really interesting case. I was assigned to Kadada, Kobani's sister, who was also one of the people charged in this. And
okay.
What I find interesting is there was a federal witness who became a federal witness for the FBI.
Okay.
and for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And he was known to have killed 11 people. They knew of the 11 people that he killed. He was part of that firebombing.
Yeah.
He did the firebombing. So that's 6. And then there was 5 more that the government knew about. And there's another one that I knew about. So 12 people this guy killed.
Wow.
And the government made a deal with him to testify against these other 4 people. And for that deal, he got sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. That does not include his time served during this whole process. So he got credit for the 8, 9, 10 years he was already in jail.
Yeah.
And for federal cases, I want to say it's you only need to serve, or for federal convictions, you only need to serve 80 or 85% of that time. So this guy who killed 12 people is going to get out of jail in 20-something years. But yet there's other people who kill one person, they get sentenced to life in prison without parole or to the death penalty. So
right. Wow.
I guess it's something interesting that the government viewed. We'd rather get these other 4 people and cut him a deal. And that's what they did.
Maximize, what you can, I guess,
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. There's the Zach Whitman was a juvenile lifer who was convicted of killing his brother back in, I want to say it was 1998, 96 or 98. Zach was 15 years old at the time, and his brother Gregory was 13. And he was convicted of stabbing him 104 times and partially decapitating him. I don't believe that he did this. I worked on his defense after the Post-Conviction Relief Act, trying to get him a new trial. But during that time, there was a documentary that was a film crew that was working on this case and doing a documentary. And what had happened, I got a witness who called in originally, but it was never followed up on 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And that person lives in Tennessee. We flew out to Tennessee to interview her, and she identified a person of interest on somebody who may have been responsible for killing Greg. And right at the same time, the courts decided that it was unconstitutional to convict a juvenile to life without parole because their brain isn't developed till they're 21 years old. So sentencing somebody who was 15 at the time for a crime that they committed, they feel that their brain didn't develop and they shouldn't have that harsh of a penalty. So all juvenile lifers, and Zach was one of them, had to be resentenced to be able to get out of jail or a new sentence, which isn't life. And at the same time that this documentary was being done and I was being interviewed and identified somebody else, they offered him to admit that he did it and he'll get out of prison in 6 months. Now, he was 15 when this happened. He didn't go to court until he was almost 21 years old. And then he got sentenced to life without parole. So basically from 15 until he was released, he was 34 or 35, I think 34 years old when he was finally released. But because the court said, or the DA's office made a deal with him, proffered that admit that you did this and we'll charge it from felony 1 to a felony 3, a homicide, murder, and you'll get out in 6 months, which he did.
Wow.
So that was an interesting case. I still don't think that he did it. I went and talked to the person after he got out of jail because we didn't want to interfere with that process.
Yeah.
And I went with the film crew who was covert and stayed in the truck, but I went with one of my investigators, and I accused this person of being responsible for the murder of Greg Whitman. And he continued to talk to me and bring me into his home and show me around his property for almost an hour. And I find that really odd. If somebody came to my house and knocked on my door and said, I think you're responsible for John Doe's murder, I'd tell him to get the blank out of here, right? Or get off my property. I'm not talking to you. And this gentleman just continued to talk and introduced me to his wife that way. It was just odd, I still feel that he's responsible for this. So
Was this out in Lancaster area?
no,
This was not.
This
in
was
PA.
York County.
York County.
York.
Okay, I feel like I've heard about this story. The documentary is out now, right?
It's called The Whitmans.
The Whitmans. Okay.
And
I've heard this story before.
Yeah, it's called The Whitmans. You can Google it and find it on the ID channel.
Yeah.
And the documentary that came out wasn't what was originally intended it to be about. It was really the original documentary, and I believe they're still hoping this becomes a Netflix series or something.
Yeah.
But it started with some college students who started their own company, and they started this as a project. And then it continued to grow, and it got sold to some different companies. And the company that finally picked it up sort of changed it to make it more about the family of a juvenile who was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Yeah.
So it was really discussing more of the family versus whether he was guilty or innocent, which was fine. But hopefully there'll be another documentary about it.
I can't imagine you lose both your sons, basically. Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with the family, and it was very hard on the parents.
Can't imagine.
In one day, they really just lost a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Yeah. Just any other tips that you might have for business owners, just as far from like a security standpoint, like just maybe everyday things that people should be aware of, things like that.
Starting a business?
No, more so from the security standpoint. I'm just thinking, we'll cut that question in two. Like, from your expertise standpoint, should a business owner be thinking about things, are there security things that they should be worried about, or
a business owner, somebody who's starting a business, and some concerns, security concerns, business concerns.
I mean, do you see frequent things that people miss, or?
They do. I think most new businesses don't survive the first 18 months.
Yeah.
Most new businesses don't survive the first year to 2 years because of employee theft. There's so much employee theft and misconduct that there's a lot of retailers, if they don't have the right security in place. And when I say security, not just physical security, where we're providing them, security guards, but security plans. How to count their money at night, how to audit their register, look for fraudulent activity that may have occurred, people stealing time. We've done work, and this is again a tip for other people, but so many people, somebody goes out on a workers' comp case or a disability case because they claim they got hurt or injured on the job, or make up things that may have happened. Insurance companies pay that out. The workers' comp just pays it out. Very little. There's a small percentage that are actually investigated, and we do a lot of them for those insurance companies and law firms. But we can get hired and have been hired directly by the business because they have somebody who they suspect is out doing something they shouldn't be doing. We had one that they were paying. He suffered a serious heart condition, and they were continuing to pay him as he was allegedly recuperating. And he was singing in a rock band at the Trocadero in Philadelphia. And I had covert video of him picking up all the heavy equipment and whatnot.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We have we had others that people go out on unemployment because their employer terminates them, and then they dispute that claim. We had one guy who kept calling out, and some of the excuses was using that his mother died of cancer, that his daughter had a miscarriage, and we started doing our investigation. We found the mother to be alive. We even delivered flowers to her. She was a cancer survivor, and we have video of my staff delivering flowers to her, saying that you're a cancer survivor, and on behalf of the Cancer Foundation, here's flowers. His daughter did have the baby. There was never a miscarriage, but he was just calling out sick. So, we can help defend companies like that with workers' comp. But those things all attribute to lack of funds, lack of money, and going out of business.
Yeah, impacting the bottom line. Yeah, sure. Yeah, an employee is really one of the biggest expenses that most businesses will.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that they are.
Before we wrap up, just kind of, in your journey of building this company, like anything that you've taken away, maybe a big challenge you've ran into that you were able to overcome, or any advice for people starting a business or running one today?
Yes, and in fact, I give a class to new private investigators called PI 101. You got your license, now what?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like giving advice to them. And the same thing you just asked me is, I would recommend anyone who's starting a business that they can start growing and working on that business while they're still employed or have another job, because starting it, unless you have the financial support of family or investments, banks, whatever, it's difficult to get started because there's a big expense that people don't realize. Whether you need certain certifications or licenses, but you also need to register. You need to become an LLC or a sole proprietor or an S corp, whatever.
Yep.
So how do you do that? Now do you need to pay an accountant or an attorney to help you with that process? You need to start marketing yourself. You need to get insurance, make sure you're insured, and just business cards and designing your business cards. And one of the mistakes I made when I first started is my very first business card I created and printed myself. You can go to Staples and buy the perforated business card templates, and I use stock photos. And when I look back, it was the ugliest, cheapest piece of junk I've ever done.
Yeah.
And then I ordered from Vistaprint, and I ordered the free business cards. And I'm not bashing Vistaprint does a great job, but on the free cards, it says on the back of it they're free cards, and they're smaller than your normal business card.
Yeah.
So invest the money, and I think that's a big thing. If you're trying to be cheap or take shortcuts, I understand money's tight, but do it right the first time, because I've done it so many different times. I've changed different logos over the years and try to rebrand a little bit. And every time you do that, it costs money. But invest in having a graphic designer or professional do it. Some stuff you can sort of sub out to Fiverr and use Fiverr a little bit, or some other things. But find that person that can create nice brochures, professional looking brochures, not things that you print yourself and fold. So just starting while you have some money, and building that baseline of that business, because it's a challenge and it's not easy. And growing your clientele, your customer base is difficult until you have been doing it for so long and you have residual clients coming back or residual income coming in, as well as when you're doing something for the first time, people want to reference. Well, can I see some of the work that you've done, or talk to somebody? And when you have nothing to show them, it's difficult.
Yeah.
So you need to start off, and then you get that word of mouth. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Just don't take shortcuts. Do it right the first time.
Yeah.
So when you got to redo it 5 times, you just paid 5 times the money if you would have just spent that money on the initial setup.
I think that's good advice. Yeah, perception's reality. It's how people interact with your business and your brand is critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Learn from my mistakes. I've done all them, and spent a lot of money, and you learn as you go. Find out what some of the industry standards are and best practices, and even things like QuickBooks. If you're not using QuickBooks and you're trying to do it for years, when I was doing my taxes at the end of the year, I'd spent hours, because I'm taking all the receipts, and now I got to log each receipt and figure out what category it goes in. And I didn't know. Nobody taught me, right?
Yeah,
there was nobody said, Jeff, this is how you should do it, until you learn or network and talk to other people. And then you transition to QuickBooks, and your bank accounts are linked and your credit cards are linked. There's nothing to do. You just approve it. It makes that process. Or hire a bookkeeper, which I've done in the past. Have an accountant, have somebody who knows what they're doing to help recommend you take the right steps.
Yeah, I mean, you can't learn a lot of this stuff in schools. They don't really teach entrepreneurship. They don't,
No.
So yeah, you kind of have to figure it out. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
So talk to other business owners.
Yeah.
There's groups from B&I networking groups to the Chamber of Commerce. There's a lot of different things out there.
Yeah.
But network and talk to other people. People want to help. I think there's a lot of people willing to sit down like we are and have this conversation and help mentor somebody.
Sure.
The SBA, the Small Business Administration, they have some free webinars and training that are pretty good too. And I never paid attention to any of them.
Right.
20 years later, I'm taking these classes and, just still trying to learn what I can.
That's good. Yeah. Always improving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's always a lot. It's never any knowledge out there. So.
Correct.
Cool. Well, Jeff, this is great. Really appreciate the opportunity here to, get to know you and what you do a little bit more. And it was a fascinating conversation. So thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I had a good time.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you?
They can call our office, 610-696-7799. We also have a toll-free number, 1-888-SEE-THAT, SEETHAT, or our website, www.elpspda.com. And there's links to everything on our website.
Yeah, we'll put all that info in the podcast also. So, Jeff, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. Shoemaker Lab is an original production by Shoemaker Films, LLC. If you enjoyed today's content, please consider subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your content. Follow us on Instagram at shoemaker.films. And if you're a business that's either interested in our video production services or would like to be a guest on the show, get in touch by using the contact form on our website, shoemakerfilms.com.